The soft hum of distant voices filters through the air, muffled yet distinct. Saad appears at the base of the stairs, his silhouette outlined by the faint light from a nearby hallway. He pauses, tilting his head slightly as the sound becomes clearer. Laughter, soft and intimate, drifting from behind a closed bedroom door. The suitcase in his hand drops to the floor with a quiet thud. Forgotten. His face tightens, confusion giving way to unease. Slowly, his hand brushes the banister as he begins his ascent, each step deliberate, the creak of the wooden stairs breaking the tense silence. The laughter stops. A faint whisper replaces it, followed by a pause so absolute it seems to press against him. Saad halts, his breath shallow, his fingers trembling as he reaches for the doorknob. He hesitates, as though bracing himself against an unknown certainty that he cannot turn away from. Gripping the doorknob tightly, slowly, he twists it. He pushes the door open. There they are. His twin brother, Saeed, and his wife, Layla, locked in an embrace that leaves nothing to interpretation. The world seems to tilt. Saad's hands trembling as he lowers them to his sides, the shadowy figures of Layla and Saeed scrambling to cover themselves and Saad taking a step back into the dark hallway. In 2014, the city of Amman, Jordan, stood as a symbol of both tradition and progress. It was there that Saad and Layla, a newlywed couple, began their life together. Their wedding day had been a celebration of joy and hope, filled with laughter, love, and promises of a bright future. Layla, radiant in her wedding gown, had looked at Saad with unshakable trust, believing that their union would withstand any challenge. Saad was a driven businessman, his career demanding frequent travel to distant cities. These absences left Layla alone in their home for long stretches, creating a void that was difficult to fill. To ensure she was cared for, Saad turned to his twin brother, Saeed. Identical in appearance but distinct in demeanor, Saeed's work allowed him to stay close to home, and he willingly stepped into the role of helper and confidant. Layla often sat by the window, staring out at the bustling streets of Amman, a city alive with movement, while her own world seemed frozen in place. Saad's work kept him away, and though she knew his efforts were for their future, the silence of the house weighed heavily on her. The laughter and conversations they shared during their honeymoon felt like distant echoes. In Saad's absence, Saeed became a constant presence. At first, it was practical. He would drop by to fix a leaky faucet, carry groceries up the stairs, or accompany her to appointments when she needed someone by her side. Each act was small, seemingly insignificant, but to Layla, they began to feel like lifelines in a sea of solitude. Said's presence was warm, unhurried and attentive in ways she hadn't realized she was missing. The moments they spent together gradually grew in frequency and intimacy. On one occasion, Saeed helped Layla prepare a meal. They worked side by side in the kitchen, their laughter filling the room as they teased each other over cooking skills. As they sat down to eat, there was a fleeting exchange of glances, a wordless connection that neither acknowledged but both felt. Another evening, Layla confided in Saeed. She spoke of how difficult it was to always be waiting, to feel like a shadow in her own marriage. Said listened without judgment, his calm reassurance offering comfort she hadn't expected. He told her she deserved happiness, his words laced with an intensity that left her unsettled. Their bond grew stronger, almost imperceptibly at first, but with an undeniable momentum. Layla began to rely on Saeed in ways she hadn't intended, seeking his companionship more often. Said, too, found himself drawn to her, justifying his actions as a means of being there for her when his brother couldn't. Their shared moments became a refuge, a space where the weight of expectation and absence seemed to lift, if only temporarily. Neither of them spoke of the line they were approaching, but it loomed in the background, an unspoken reality they couldn't ignore. Each day, their connection deepened, the boundaries of their roles as brother-in-law and sister-in-law blurring further. They were two people caught in a quiet storm of emotions, their choices leading them toward consequences neither could foresee. The air between Layla and Saeed felt thick, almost suffocating in its intensity. As they moved around the house, the simple act of rearranging furniture had transformed into something else, something neither of them had anticipated. What had begun as a casual task to pass the time had now become a battleground for emotions neither could understand. Layla's heart was in overdrive, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. She had been married to Saad for a year, but the truth was, her marriage had often felt like a distant memory. Saad's business trips had kept him away for weeks at a time, and when he was home, he was a shadow of the man she had once known. She remembered their wedding day, how hopeful and full of promise they had been. But in the days and months that followed, Saad's ambition had taken precedence, leaving Layla to navigate her loneliness in silence. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She didn't expect to find comfort in her brother-in-law's presence. She could feel Saeed's gaze on her as she adjusted a piece of furniture, his eyes lingering longer than they ever had before. Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't remember the last time Saad had looked at her like that, with such warmth, such intensity. Said too had changed over the months. He wasn't just the dependable twin brother anymore. He had become something more. It was innocent at first, just casual help, a way to keep her company when she needed it. He never saw it as anything beyond that. But somewhere along the way, his feelings for her had shifted. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had happened, but one day, he realized he was no longer simply looking out for her as a brother would. His feelings had deepened in a way that startled him. He had always admired Layla for her beauty and her strength, but now, as he watched her struggle with loneliness, something within him began to stir. The truth was, Saeed had always been the one who stayed. He began to question everything. He began to feel a pull toward Layla that he couldn't explain. Tonight, however, it was different. There was a tension in the air, a feeling neither could deny. As they shifted the furniture, their bodies brushed against each other more often than necessary. Layla's hands shook as she adjusted a table. She could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the warmth of his skin. For a fleeting second, she wondered if he could hear the rapid beating of her heart, if he could feel the way her pulse raced. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she didn't know how to stop it. She looked up at him. Said's gaze was soft but intense, searching her face for something. Layla's breath hitched as she felt the weight of his eyes on her, and suddenly, all the doubts she had been harboring about her marriage and her loneliness seemed to vanish. Said, for the first time, stepped closer to her. His voice was barely a whisper. Her emotions were swirling, and she felt an unfamiliar urge to reach out, his body drawing closer to hers. And then, without warning, it happened. Said's lips brushed against hers, soft and tentative at first. But Layla responded, slowly at first, then with growing urgency. She kissed him back, a kiss that spoke of all the months of loneliness, of yearning, of moments left unsaid. The weight of the kiss was heavy, laden with guilt, but also with a fierce, uncontrollable desire. They stumbled toward the couch, unable to break free from the pull between them. the kiss deepened, each touch more desperate than the last. But as the night wore on and they lay there together, a dark realization began to settle in. Both of them were aware of the line they had crossed, and though the moment had seemed right in the heat of it, the consequences loomed over them like a storm. Layla closed her eyes, her chest heaving with the weight of her actions. She had justified it to herself, told herself it was just filling a void. But now, as the reality of what had happened set in, she couldn't ignore the truth. She had betrayed Saad, and in doing so, she had destroyed everything. Saad lay beside her, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was something deeper, something dangerous. There was a strange sense of clarity in his chest, an overwhelming feeling of having done something he couldn't undo. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The silence between them was deafening, a silent acknowledgement that they had changed the course of their lives forever. Saad had always been a man deeply consumed by his work, often away for long stretches of time, traveling from city to city, managing deals, and dealing with the stresses of his business. Yet, even in his busiest moments, there was an instinct inside him, a nagging sense that something was shifting back home, something he couldn't quite place, but felt deep in his gut. When he returned home after his latest trip, he immediately noticed the difference in Layla's demeanor. Not in a way that was overtly noticeable, but in the small things. Her smile seemed wider, more genuine than it had been in weeks. There was a lightness in her voice, an energy he hadn't heard before. But what struck him most was the way she acted when Said was around. Layla had always been fond of her brother-in-law, but now she practically beamed when he showed up. He could see it in her eyes, the joy that lit up her face whenever he entered the room. There was a warmth in her presence that Saad couldn't shake, felt reserved for someone more than just family. Saad's visits were frequent, more frequent than usual. At first, Saad had chalked it up to the fact that his brother-in-law had been kind enough to look after Layla while he was away, running errands, accompanying her to appointments, and helping out with the house. But now, as he sat in the living room, watching them talk, laughing about some shared joke, he couldn't help but notice how much time they spent together. It seemed like no matter when he came home, Said was there, always just a little too present. Saad began to feel as though his brother was everywhere, helping Layla, fixing things around the house, running errands, even picking up the grocery shopping. It was small things at first that made him uneasy, a knowing glance exchanged between them that felt too personal. The way Layla's voice softened when she spoke to Said, as if there was a private joke between them. The subtle but frequent physical proximity, the way they stood just a little too close, the way their hands brushed, and the way their smiles lingered. Saad found himself replaying moments over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of what his eyes were seeing, but still unsure of what it all meant. The unease grew with every passing day. It wasn't until one night, when Saad returned home unexpectedly early from a trip, that the first real crack appeared in the facade. He had planned to surprise Layla with an early return to make up for the time he had spent away. But when he entered the house, something felt different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension. He noticed the door to their bedroom was slightly ajar, and he could hear faint whispers and quiet laughter. His heart skipped a beat, an uneasy feeling washing over him. He moved quietly, trying to make as little noise as possible, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As he crept closer, he could make out voices, Layla's laughter, a soft murmur of Saeed's voice. He reached the door, and before he could stop himself, he pushed it open just a crack. What he saw left him frozen in place. Layla and Saeed were sitting together on the bed, their faces close, sharing a private moment. In that brief second, Saad saw something that shattered him, a connection between his wife and his brother that went beyond family, beyond friendship. It was a look, a glance, that spoke volumes, and the room suddenly felt colder. His body went stiff with shock, his mind racing as he tried to process the scene in front of him. He couldn't believe it, not at first. He had trusted Saeed, trusted him more than anyone. But now, as he stood there, the weight of the truth was slowly sinking in. And he staggered back slightly, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. He'd been away for only a few days, but this was a betrayal that went beyond anything he could have prepared for. His wife, Layla, and his twin brother Saeed together, intimately. "How long has this been going on?" Said, guilty and terrified, tried to speak, but Saad wasn't listening. He couldn't hear anything but the fury that boiled inside him. Layla's pleas for him to calm down went unheard as Saad advanced on Saeed, grabbing him by the collar. The room exploded into chaos as Saad shoved his brother against the wall, his hands tightening with every word of protest. In one violent motion, Saad struck Saeed, sending him crashing to the floor. Layla screamed, rushing to her husband in an attempt to intervene, but it was too late. Saad, still breathing heavily, turned on her, his eyes wild with fury. He hissed. Before she could respond, he lunged at her. In a single, tragic moment, Saad ended both their lives, his hands stained with the blood of the people he had once loved most. In the days that followed, the shocking deaths of Layla and Saeed became the talk of the town. The media swarmed, each outlet eager to report on the twisted tale of betrayal that had unfolded behind closed doors. Cameras flashed as Saad, handcuffed and shackled, was led into the courtroom. His once proud demeanor now replaced with hollow eyes, staring into nothingness. The courtroom was packed with people, friends, family, even strangers who had heard the rumors and felt the weight of the tragedy. Lawyers presented their cases, but the evidence was undeniable. Saad had killed both his wife and his brother in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Despite the damning evidence, Saad remained cold and distant. There was no remorse in his eyes as he listened to the testimonies. When asked about his actions, Saad's voice was steady but devoid of any empathy. The betrayal was too much, he explained, his words sharp, like the echo of a wound that had never healed. They took everything from me. The prosecution painted a picture of a man driven to madness, consumed by anger and heartbreak. The defense, however, tried to argue that Saad had acted out of a momentary lapse in judgment, claiming that the depth of his pain had overwhelmed him. In the end, the jury deliberated briefly before returning with a verdict: guilty. Saad was sentenced to life in prison, his actions sealing not only his fate, but the end of his once promising future. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Saad stood motionless, a shadow of the man he used to be. Outside the courtroom, the community was left in shock. Friends, family, and neighbors all struggled to comprehend how a love so pure could devolve into such an unimaginable tragedy. Saad had once been a man with dreams, a future, and a family. But in an instant, everything had crumbled beneath the weight of his emotions and choices. Layla and Saeed, too, had played their part in the tragedy. This tale serves as a painful reminder that decisions made in moments of weakness, without considering the long-term consequences, can have irreversible effects. and once the damage is done, there is no turning back. What story should we tell next? Drop your suggestions in the comments. If you find this story gripping, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories. Join us as we explore the complexities of human emotions. Your thoughts matter. Comment below and stay tuned for more.